Good evening, everyone. Happy 2023. How's everything going for all of you? Good evening. Welcome to another live stream here on the Left Lens. You know what to do. When you come in here, be sure, in order to boost this stream in the algorithm, that you've liked the stream. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. YouTube does some funny things. They like to sometimes take people off of the subscriber rolls, believe it or not. Also, hit that notifications bell so you know when I go live, because it isn't always the case that these streams pop up in your YouTube feed. So be sure to hit that notifications bell as well. And of course, we have entered the year 2023, and this channel, all of the work that I do is still completely independent. So please do support this work monetarily if you are able. The best place to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the description. You can also join here as a member on YouTube. I see JM. For now, I think there are a few others, Phil, in the chat. So thank you all for being YouTube members. That's a great place to support. And you can find a bunch of other links to Substack and other places to support this work in the description as well. It is great to be with all of you. Give me a sound check. Let me check the chat. Give me a sound check. How do I sound? How do I sound, everybody? Let me see. Just give me a quick sound check. I haven't used this equipment in a while. All right, so give me a quick sound check, everyone. Keep liking this video as we get started here. All right, thank you so much, Desert Mantis, for that quick sound check. I hope all of you are able to hear me all right, that the volume is good, all of that good stuff. All right, everyone says the volume is good. Okay, so keep liking this video, keep liking this stream, keep boosting this in the algorithm. We have a host of great stories today. We have 165 likes, 195 viewers. That's a pretty good ratio. Let's keep that up throughout. All right. So everyone who's new, be sure to like this video. So where do we begin? All right. It's 2023. I have new glasses. I have a new haircut. I didn't really do anything with it, but nonetheless, new haircut, new glasses, but not a new me. Same me, same left lens, same great content. Same great geopolitical analysis, anti-imperialist analysis from a truly left perspective. Not latte left, not liberal left, not social democratic left, not whatever else people think is the left these days. There are some political strands out there who think that Democrats are the left, Joe Biden is the left. None of that exists here. This is a truly left perspective on geopolitics and all that relate to it, because I take the perspective that everything is related, that you cannot talk about what's going on around the world without understanding what's happening in the belly of the beast of the American empire. Now, we have a very incredible number of stories to get to. They are going to take some time, so I want to get started pretty quickly here. We're going to talk about first Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin had a call on December 30th, right before the end of 2022, right before we enter 2023, and it triggered the Western media. And we're going to go over how the New York Times reacted to this. We're not going to read it, but I'm going to show you a very strange reaction. Also, a very interestingly timed piece by The Intercept as well, basically showing itself as a CIA cutout. I'm going to show you all of that reaction that this meeting got and what exactly is the character of the Russia-China alliance. I'm going to go through it by the numbers so you know exactly what is going on, and that we're not just listening to literally the neocon pundits and those in the Beltway who are the only sources that places, corporate media outlets like the New York Times like to cite. So I'm going to go over all of those sources. We're going to just pierce through the New York Times' propaganda so you all are more prepared to do so on your own time and in your own work. Now, we are also going to then talk about the Duran's analysis of really big developments happening between Syria and Turkey, potential peace talks. There are some hopes that Erdogan and Assad will be speaking soon, but the foreign ministers got together between the Assad government in Syria, the Assad-led government, the Ba'ath Party-led government in Syria, and, of course, Erdogan and his leadership, the foreign ministry in Turkey, and they talked. And there are really good signs for peace. But after the Duran did their analysis, I'm going to show you what the latest development is. And actually, we have Turkey also meeting with Syria's opposition. So there's some double dealing going on. And I will talk about what is the context for all that, what exactly has been going on in Syria. That's going to be the second story. Then third, we have Oliver North, good old felon Oliver North, the fall guy for the Iran-Contra scandal, that Reagan era policy. Really, I mean, we should trace it back to Jimmy Carter, but really it was a Reagan era policy that was it's just incredibly important to the geopolitical situation, the Cold War situation at that time. But Oliver North has some really blatant truths to tell about the situation with Ukraine and how it definitely is all about leading up to getting the United States and it's prepared and its allies prepared for a larger war on China. And so that's what we will close with. Thank you so much, Jeff, for becoming a new member. And of course, for all those who have given super stickers and super chats thus far, I will do shout outs also at the end of the stream. So happy new year, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Keep liking this video. Let's get these views up. We have about 300 viewers and about 211 likes. Let's try to keep that 1-to-1. All right, so let's just get started here. All right, I have my headphones on. I'm gonna take them off actually. As you can tell, I have Venezuela on my right. I have Palestine on my left. I have my book on my left. A bookshelf chock full of books that are super important to understanding history mostly, and there's some theory in there. But the geopolitical analysis, a lot has not been talked about. A lot has not been written about yet, right? So a lot of what we do here is kind of writing that analytical history, that theoretical foundations for understanding global developments in the here and now in real time. All right. So let's do this, everyone. First things first. And this topic is dear to my heart because I do believe, okay, I do believe that the Russia-China alliance is the future. Now, I don't even want to call it an alliance. I'll use the language that Russia and China uses, which is a comprehensive strategic partnership. This relationship, the China-Russia, Russia-China relationship, is the most important relationship in the world right now. You have two rising giants in the East. You have China gearing up to be the biggest economy in the world in GDP terms in not a decade. You have Russia coming out of shock therapy, out of the demise of the Soviet Union, and becoming more assertive on the world stage, influential. You have the global South embracing Russia. You have Russia embracing the global South. And you, of course, have the same development with China, where countries all around the world have recognized China as a leader in multipolarity, as a leader in self-determination, as a leader in defending the UN Charter and all of its principles. That's the reality of the situation. No matter what the US and Western corporate media tell you, this is the reality. This is how most world leaders think, right? We have to understand that the US and its vassal states in Europe and wherever else, they are a very small segment of the world, and the China-Russia alliance is the future. And I'm going to go over all the reasons why in a minute, but it's important to note that recently, this relationship has become just so much more important than even prior to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. After February, this relationship became incredibly important. There's all these rumors, right? Because the Winter Olympics happened right before. I don't know if you remember, but the Winter Olympics happened in China right before Russia decided to throw its weight into its special military operation in Ukraine. And there's all this rumor mongering. Oh, well, you know, China and Russia talked before then. Xi Jinping and Putin made it public, right? They were publicly meeting during the Olympics, watching the Olympics together, saying that their friendship is more than just a friendship, that it's much more important than just a friendship. And then Russia did what China didn't want to do. And now you have all of this pearl clutching by the empire's media, by the United States, by the neocons, by NATO countries, these rabid hawks. You have all kinds of pearl clutching going on because all of this talk about Russia and China being divided, China didn't want Russia to do that with a special military operation. Russia feels kind of envious of China because it's not in the same situation. Oh, these two countries are weak, they're divided. All of this has been completely and utterly debunked as utter trashy propaganda with no basis in reality. And so on December 30th, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping jumped on a video call, and they talked about a lot of things. One of the things that has scared the Western media and corporate media in particular is the possibility of military cooperation and coordination. Now, this isn't something that's new. China and Russia have been doing this for quite a many years. This strategic partnership really began in the year 2001 when they signed their friendship agreement. But it has massively grew, and I'm going to show you exactly how. But first, we need to talk about how the Western media reacted to this video call, because it was very routine. They talked about military coordination, but Putin and Xi both reiterated that their relationship is not just about their bilateral cooperation, that they are now setting an example to the world of what it means to be leaders in global stability and showing the way forward around the world, showing the way forward to nations around the world, and how their example is so important in that. And this all scares, just frightens the Beltway neocons, the warmongers, because they see the writing on the wall that this relationship is only strengthening. It's only getting stronger. Trade between the two countries is increasing by the month. We're not even talking about year on year. We're talking about a monthly increase in trade volume. We're talking about two countries that are not just seeing eye to eye economically together bilaterally, but they're seeing eye to eye on these big global questions, which go in complete contradiction to how the empire sees the world. Because, mind you, the United States, and of course its vassal states, who see through the eyes of the neocon and imperialist snake, they see the world as completely and utterly theirs, that they are hegemonic, that there's only one leader in the world, that history has ended, there is no other social order that can be allowed to exist, and there's none other that will exist, and that is the United States' unipolar imperial order. That is being challenged directly by China and Russia's growing bond, their growing partnership. And this video call, just mentioning military coordination, which they just did a week before. There were Navy exercises happening between Russia and China working together. That's an annual military drill. That's not something that's considered very controversial, nor is it supposed to be targeting a third party. But there's an acknowledgement that a lot of Russia and China's military cooperation and coordination is going to be in preparation for what they see as a coming conflict with the United States. Because one thing that really does unite these two countries, it's not the only thing, and I wouldn't even call it the most important reason these two countries work together so closely, but it is a big one, and that is that both of them are experiencing military encirclement by the United States. Russia vis-a-vis NATO expansion, why the Ukraine conflict crisis is happening in the first place, and then the United States with the encirclement, whether it's Taiwan, the South China Sea, really all the Asia Pacific, with U.S. military installations. And of course, the UK, Canada, even many European countries in the EU have just slavishly, right, just completely in their vassal ways, just drag their feet along with the American empire against China, despite how contradictory, how counterproductive it is for them. And so the writing's on the wall to China and to Russia. They know what is coming. And so they are preparing. And this call was very important because of the reaction that it garnered first and foremost. And so I'm going to go over that right now. Let's pull up how the New York Times talked about that, because there was so many interesting little remarks made here that we need to understand as being part of this propaganda war against both of these countries. So the New York Times immediately wrote a piece. This was kind of a signature. This is a signature neocon response to what's happening between Russia and China. And they even admit a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about afterwards, which is the growing partnership between the two and how it is very robust. They don't go into enough, but thankfully, Russia and China can tell that story for us. So here we go. The New York Times, right, reported immediately that Xi and Putin met and that it represented two strong men in a weak moment. So, of course, strong men being the Cold War trope. We can ignore that as just propaganda. Of course, it's a propaganda war. But in a weak moment is a very interesting framing, because they say Russia is isolated by its invasion of Ukraine and needs China more than ever. But China is facing a COVID crisis and is in no position to risk sanctions. So there you have the empire is no close. They're talking about sanctions already immediately. So that's a veiled threat, right? You go the way of Russia, you go with Russia, you could face sanctions. Now, China already does face sanctions. There's already sanctions on tech. There's already sanctions around so-called human rights atrocity campaigns that the United States has led. But they're in no way as powerful as the sanctions on Russia in their scope and in their overall impact on the global economy, because China is very much economically insulated given how important it is. But nonetheless, there is a visible panic, and you'll see it as we read through here. Visible panic among the military industrial complex and those forces, those neocons who want to see a two-pronged war against Russia and China. So the New York Times says, when China's top leader Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin of Russia declared a no-limits partnership 10 months ago, the pair projected an aura of strength and a direct challenge to the U.S. and the West. As the two leaders met again on Friday via video, they found themselves in positions of weakness, they say, encumbered by geopolitical and economic threats to their informal authoritarian alliance. Both now have little room to maneuver, making the relationship all the more important, albeit also a lot more complicated. So, of course, right, authoritarian, that's just another trope to demonize these two countries. But what's important here is that they're trying to frame this as weakness, this relationship now, and that they have little room to maneuver. I question those assertions, but let's read a bit more, and I'll tell you why. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in February, Mr. Putin has been isolated and highly dependent on China to maintain a semblance of diplomatic and financial stability. His needs have intensified in recent months as the Kremlin has suffered setbacks on the battlefield in a grinding war that has killed thousands of civilians and left Russia's economy vulnerable. First of all, Russia is not isolated. We've covered it here. We've had Pepe Escobar. We've had Scott Ritter. We've had many experts, Mark Sloboda, Brian Berletic, who will be here again on Thursday, January 5th, so save the date. But we've been here many times before on this channel talking about, is Russia isolated? Absolutely not. The majority of the global south, almost all of the global south, said no to the sanctions. Russia's ruble has done much better than even in prior years before this war. Russia is not isolated. Russia has been able to both stabilize itself nationally, right? Be able taking the policies necessary to stabilize its economy, as well as maintain key alliances to, to ensure that it can brave these winds, that it can get through this storm, because it is a storm. Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world right now. So Russia is not isolated. That's propaganda. To continue, the New York Times says this month, Xi has seen the much-touted coronavirus pandemic strategy unravel and COVID cases explode, marring the image he wants to present to the world as a leader of a superior political system. With the current crisis, he can neither throw fully his weight behind Mr. Putin and risk sanctions, nor abandon him and risk losing a key geopolitical ally to counter the West. So this is just conjecture. There's no basis in reality here. Just to throw in the COVID-19 situation in China, there's no connection there. China is not going through a crisis. China is, reopening because it feels it's necessary for China. There's no hospital crisis. There's no deaths crisis. All of that is just propaganda. But they're trying to argue that Xi Jinping and China cannot fully support Russia, but cannot fully abandon Russia, as if that is going through the minds of any of China's leadership, let alone Xi Jinping at all. Again, this is conjecture. This is just storytelling, typical of the New York Times. They betrayed little shakiness, though, in their situations on Friday, pointing in public statements to beefier bilateral trade and growing military cooperation. Beefier, that's a pretty cringe term, but in a seeming nod to continue to the strains, Mr. Xi acknowledged, quote, the complicated and consistently changing international situation, end quote, but said China was ready to improve strategic collaboration with Russia, according to a transcript of Xi's remarks published by state media. So, again, this is more storytelling. First of all, to acknowledge that there's a complicated and consistently changing international situation has nothing to do with the Russia-China strategic partnership. It's just acknowledging that surely the world is in a complicated place right now. That's just talking from Xi Jinping. He's just laying out the reality. But the New York Times, of course, is trying to say, and they do this many times in this article, that indicates that the Russia-China partnership is shaky. You get what I'm saying here? A lot of conjecture, a lot of storytelling. Storytelling because they don't really have any facts. They don't want to present the facts you need to know. And there's no, and of course, they don't want to present facts at all because that would go against their predetermined narrative. And here's what's interesting, okay? So they quote a source, and this is what they always do at the New York Times. They always quote their Beltway neocon establishment think tanks. So Yun Sun, who's a director at the China program at the Simpson Center, said as long as the two have the U.S. as their shared common threat, the convergence of their interests will outweigh the divergence. So this is from the Stimson Center. And I can pull up what the Stimson Center is. And this is why you can't take anything in the New York Times very seriously, because the Stimson Center is literally funded by hawkish governments, the U.S. government. It is funded by military contractors, by the embassies of U.S. allies. It is not something to be trusted. So here you go. Here you have Stimson right up there. This is the Stimson think tank. And here's its 2021 statement. Okay. I'm going to zoom it in a bit. We don't have to go over that, but we can go over the sources here. I mean, we can go to this and see that the U.S. government alone is 18% of its entire funding sources. And that does not include foreign governments, which are aligned, as well as foundations, which are aligned with the U.S. government. But I digress because it's important to go over exactly who is funding this. You have Amazon.com, Boeing, Japan, supposedly, the Carnegie Corporation, of course, Charles Koch, the Koch Institute. Here's a cringe one, the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. Here you have the Center for Strategic and International Studies, also a major donor, okay? And that's another State Department think tank, another military contractor-funded think tank. You have the Embassy of Japan. You have Northrop Grumman in here. Of course, this is going by alphabetical order, so let me keep going fast down this list. Okay, Lockheed Martin, there you go. Lockheed Martin is in there with a pretty big sum of $17,000. All right, so this is what you have. You have a bunch of these think tanks, corporations, right? Northrop Grumman here with a sweet $10,000 grant. Essentially, you have the Stimson Center as nothing but a neocon think tank, and that's what passes for sources at the New York Times, and that's not the only source that they use. So we're going to continue, all right, reading through this. I just wanted to show you what their sources are. What's legitimate here? This is coming right from the mouthpiece of the war machine. all of this conjecture and the storytelling is to get you to support what these military contractors, what these foundations, what these governments, the U.S. government, Qatari, whatever, these governments, what they want, right, geopolitically. And a lot of it is they want unipolarity. They want the United States to remain dominant. Of course, that is becoming much more contested, even among countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which are finding unipolarity to be suffocating for themselves as well. But let's continue with the article. So Mr. Putin used the call on Friday to reaffirm Russia's ties to China, calling them a model of cooperation between major powers in the 21st century, according to a readout by the Kremlin. He invited Xi Jinping to visit Moscow in the spring and suggested the two countries could overcome the unfavorable external situation together. We share the same views on the causes, course, and logic of the ongoing transformation of the global geopolitical landscape in the face of unprecedented pressure and provocations from the West, Mr. Putin said. Russia sees China as its most important partner in its existential showdown with the West. Every word of support for Mr. Xi is amplified by evidence that Mr. Putin is far from alone in taking on Europe and the United States. But do you see how they're portraying this? It's all about Xi Jinping and Putin. Putin and Xi are the ones who are attacking the West. They're the ones who are confronting the West. They're the ones who are challenging the West. In reality, they are coming together because they are threatened by the West. They are the ones who are being targeted. There's military targets on their backs. There's economic warfare targets on their backs. There's diplomatic, human rights, all kinds of atrocity propaganda, the propaganda war targets on their back. And now we're supposed to believe that the United States and the West are innocent here, that they are just purely observing this development, that Xi and Putin, Russia and China are just aggressive countries that are coming together because they want to challenge the West just because. Not true. They need to defend themselves against the West because there's a real threat of war led by the United States. So here's another funny one. A column published by Russia's RIA Novosti state news agency on Thursday showed how the Kremlin was lauding the partnership while reducing expectations for how much support China would provide. Without providing proof, the article claimed that China was working to help Russia get around sanctions. This was happening not as quickly or simply as Russia would like, the article said, but what matters is the process itself. So I have this article, all right? And of course, it's an English translation done by my web browser, so we can't necessarily say that it's a perfect translation. But what is being said here, that China was working to help Russia get around sanctions and that it wasn't happening as quickly as Russia would like, is completely and utterly an attempt to get you to think that these countries are conniving, that they are cooperating sneakily, right? This is underhanded racism here, this underhanded hegemonism, this condescension to say that these countries are sneakily trying to undermine the United States, but it's not happening. And Russia is kind of sad because Russia's not getting exactly what it's wants as fast as it wants. So here again is this portrayal of these two countries divided. Now let me pull up this article because actually the article says something completely different. All right. So here is the article. Again, this is an English translation done by the browser. So there's going to be some issues, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to scroll down to what they are citing here. This is the sentence. All right. Tell me if you think that this shows division or unity. I think it shows unity. So the article says the strange hopes of some Western analysts that China would take an equidistant position on Russia around Ukraine did not materialize, although officially China is not going to be subject to Western anti-Russian sanctions. In reality, there are plenty of opportunities to circumvent them. What Moscow and Beijing are successfully doing is not as fast and simple as Russia would like, but the process itself is important here. So what this article is saying, right, is that China took a position above the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And it did not, it's posing as neutral. It's saying we're neutral here, but it supported Russia. That's what the article is saying. And China has reminded the West of the need to take account Russia's concern for security, and that it was the West that provoked Putin to use force. And so what the article is actually saying is that these two countries are in fact united, that they are united, and that the process is not going as fast as both of them would like. Of course, Russia, they're citing Russia here, would like it to go faster, but but what this article is saying is that they're going through this process together, not separate. And here you have just another example of the US corporate media, the Western corporate media, lying to your face, trying to promote division among these two countries in your mind. So you believe in something that's not true. So you are, I don't know, going to feel better about yourself. But really what they want at the New York Times is for you to support their position that these two countries are weak, and you should support their further weakening. That's what the New York Times is arguing here when they throw in little subtle propaganda jabs in this broader propaganda war. They're not even trying to hide it, but here they try to really hide it underneath what already is just an overt smear piece on the two countries. So the article continues saying that in a sign of Moscow's growing reliance, China accounted for more than a quarter of Russia's total imports in the first 9 months of the year, compared with less than 15% in the first 9 months of last year, according to Alina Rybakova, deputy chief economist at the Institute for International Finance in Washington. Again, another Washington-based think tank of this time Wall Street. But of the new car brands, this is what's interesting here, sold on the Russian market still after the sanctions, the only foreign ones, which there are 11, are Chinese. So that's what Russia is reporting, that China is the only country right now selling cars inside of Russia. So they're acknowledging that this partnership is robust. This partnership is not wavering. This partnership is not weak. But yet they throw that in, right? They throw that acknowledgement in within a sea of propaganda and ideological, just complete and utter falsehoods. With Europe scrambling to wean itself off of Russian fossil fuels, China has become a critical customer. 3 times this month, the Russian energy giant Gazprom announced breaking its record for single-day gas deliveries to China. Ding, ding, ding. This partnership is not weak. This partnership is strong. On Friday, the two leaders vowed to deepen their ties. Mr. Xi called for China and Russia to provide each other with support for issues involving core interests, and Mr. Putin aimed to strengthen cooperation between Russian and Chinese forces. Here's the trigger, the real triggering thought. Military and military technical cooperation occupies a special place in our relations, in our ties, said Putin. It facilitates the security of our countries and supports stability in key regions. China is loath to violate sanctions. Western officials say that because of this, Russia has turned to 2 other friendly countries, Iran and North Korea, for emergency deals to address its shortfall in arms and ammunition. I mean, here you go again, right? China's not providing arms, so it has to go to lowly North Korea and Iran. That Russia and China, they don't think like this. This is the zero-sum game that the empire thinks of. This is their propaganda. This is their mentality. And they're trying to project it onto Russia and China. But China's partnership, the New York Times says, is important for the broader symbolism of Moscow helping to lead an anti-Western front, a key propaganda trope for Putin, who often rails against a Western golden billion purportedly trying to dominate and exploit the rest of the world's population. Where's the lie there? Putin doesn't seem to be lying there. It seems to me that that's exactly what the West is doing. It's trying to exploit the rest of the world's population. It's not trying, actually. It is doing that in a lot of ways. So here you have the New York Times trying to turn reality into lies. This is how they try to confuse you into supporting their dangerous war games. The West is trying to pressure with all of its strength Beijing and the head of the People's Republic of China personally, demanding they turn away from Moscow and Putin. The marquee News Weekly show on Russian state television, Vesti Nedeli, declared last Sunday, but Beijing positions is unchanged. Their propaganda on Ukraine often aligns, deriding the United States for pushing Russia into war and taking aim at the more muscular posture of NATO. The U.S. So here we go. The U.S. is making all efforts to cheer Ukraine on so it can continue its conflict with Russia, said the Global Times in a recent commentary. Washington hopes to use the war to completely crush Moscow, including making the latter lose its morale within the international community. So here you have them trying to say, and The Intercept does the same damn thing. This is literally and I'm going to show you really quickly. I'm not going to go over the article. The Intercept did the same thing. They literally repeated exactly what the New York Times said about Russia and China here around the propaganda. Here you have the most recent article from The Intercept. Hacked Russian files revealed propaganda agreement with China. This was written on December 30th, the same day. It was published the same day as this meeting. And they said that Russia and China discussed the exchange of news and social content. And literally the entire argument in this article is that because their information aligns on Ukraine, that means they are coordinating together to propagandize all of your minds, right, into an international audience. When the reality is what they're saying, right, what they're saying about Ukraine, what China is saying, right, is not lie. It's not a lie. What Russia is saying has a lot of legitimate truth to it, but they want you to believe that everything that these countries say is propaganda, that there's absolutely no truth to what they're saying, despite the fact that these are conflicts, especially with Russia, that's happening to them. What interest would it be for them to lie about how they are being targeted? So that's how ridiculous this all gets. But nonetheless, it's just important to know that The Intercept, which of course was funded at one time, First Look Media still is, of course, the big parent company, but Pierre Omidyar, the big tech billionaire who is very connected to the CIA and U.S. intelligence, he was the big backer behind The Intercept. Of course, you all know about the Glenn Greenwald debacle. The Intercept has lost its credibility for quite some time with James Risen and neocons like that on their payroll, and they have been very untrustworthy on any questions of international politics for a very, very, very long time, arguably since the beginning. So here we have the New York Times and The Intercept aligning on this point that everything China and Russia says is just propaganda and they're trying to brainwash you. Meanwhile, you're reading articles where you're getting brainwashed into neocon propaganda, and just isn't that so fitting, right? Isn't that so fitting that the projection just goes that deep? So let's continue, right? Chinese scholars, according to the New York Times, emphasize that the majority of countries in the world have not agreed to join sanctions against Russia and challenge the notion that Moscow is isolated beyond the West and its allies. Where's the lie? Africa, Latin America. Tell me how many countries in these regions, the Caribbean, even in much of Eurasia, tell me how many of these countries are going along with the Western sanctions, and you will not be able to find as many as you maybe thought there were. Because a lot of this is the EU and the United States slapping these sanctions on and trying to force these countries into following them. The United States and the European Union do not represent the world, said Xu Poling, a Russia expert at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. China's backing comes despite the complications of the invasion that have been created for Xi. Beijing has been building on its economic ties with Western allies, but the war has moved Europe more in line with the U.S. efforts to undercut China. The invasion has also drawn more attention to China's threats to invade the self-governing island of Taiwan, and the disruption of Europe's economy from soaring energy prices has roiled one of China's biggest export markets. So, this is just more of the same, right? More of the same. Just talking about how somehow Ukraine has made it harder for China. Doesn't seem like that. It's the Ukraine crisis, of course, has made everything harder for the world. The whole global economy is in a slowdown, and China has, of course, bore some of those consequences. Everyone has. But nonetheless, they're trying to make this seem like there is some kind of, there's some kind of threat to China because the United States and the West want to propagandize about Taiwan, and they want to move Europe into a very isolated vassal position against Russia and China. Now, none of those things are untrue, but the fact of the matter is that they're trying to blame China for this here. So they're trying to blame, of course, Russia because Russia decided to conduct its special military operation. Now, of course, the truth is that the West, the United States, is provoking all of this, and it's the aggression, the militarism from the U.S., from NATO, from these vassal states that has caused all of this. That's what they don't want to tell you. There are hints that Xi's unease over the war is growing. During a meeting in Beijing last week, he expressed hope to Dmitry Medvedev, the close Putin ally and Russian president, that all parties concerned will exercise rational restraint. Putin also alluded to Xi's discomfort when he acknowledged the Chinese leader's questions and concerns at a summit at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Uzbekistan in September when the two leaders met. So, again, it's more storytelling, right? It's like there's no proof or evidence here. You don't have any transcripts. You don't have any citations. From the Chinese media side, the meeting between Medvedev and Xi Jinping was incredibly warm. And there were some thoughts that maybe they were talking about military cooperation as well. And of course, China's diplomatic position will always be everyone should restrain themselves and not go too far with this because it's going to damage everyone, China included, but it'll damage the entire world. A pretty reasonable position, but nonetheless, the United States wants to use that as a wedge. The U.S. corporate media wants to use it as a wedge with Russia. And it's failing. I mean, it's just failing entirely. The New York Times says that Western leaders have urged Mr. Xi to do more to persuade Mr. Putin to stop the war, but the Chinese leader has told European officials that they overestimate the role he can play as mediator, according to two officials with knowledge of the discussions. The officials added that the Chinese and Russian leaders share a strong personal relationship, and Xi says that he trusts Putin. True as that may be, so here we go, right? Xi can ill afford to abandon Putin or watch the Russian leader's ambitions collapse in Ukraine. Doing so would critically weaken a geopolitical ally and leave China to compete with the U.S. on its own at a time when the Chinese leader faces mounting foreign and domestic challenges. And then they go on to say that the COVID crisis, now they reopen and now there's hospitals filling up and they're becoming stressed and the more death tolls and lies, and that's their legitimacy is being questioned. What utter hypocrisy, right? First, it was China's bad with COVID because of the lockdowns and because of its zero COVID. Terrible, right? China's terrible. This was across the political spectrum from January 2020, even before that, late December, but really being in January 2020 when Wuhan was locked down, the third week of January, all the way into now. China's authoritarian. China's bad. COVID bad. Their numbers are lies. They're hiding things. Now that they've reopened it, oh my God, you're not locking down anymore. You're not doing anything for people. How could you? All these people are going to die. Meanwhile, in the United States, look at the situation economically, look at how many people have suffered, and then look at all the people that have actually legitimately died, not just of COVID, but of everything because of the way that the government neglected them, the way that the economy left them out to die. That's what has happened in the last 3 years. Oh, just in this situation alone, but it's not just that situation. It's the fact that happened amid what has been a slow deterioration in any capacity for the United States to meet the needs of the majority of people. That has been deteriorating for quite some time, and it's because corporations, oligarchs, monopolies, they're running away with everything while you have nothing. And that is what they don't want you to know. They want you to look at China, and you believe that China is in this bad position with Russia because it can't abandon Putin and Russia around Ukraine, but it can't go too far because it's going through its own problems. Somehow now China and Russia are the unstable ones. So here you go. Xi is also being stung by rising pressure from the U.S. Few things of greater consequences have occurred than the sweeping restrictions introduced in early October on semiconductor technology exports to China, which could set the country's high-tech industries by years. So here's the one acknowledgement of U.S. policy. The United States literally shirking the market, literally manipulating it to undermine China's rise in high technology, in particular semiconductors. I don't think it's going to work. Of course, it has hampered China's semiconductor capacity, but they're going their own way, and it's actually been going quite well. And China will be fine. But here's the one small acknowledgement that the U.S. has something to do here. They continue, and this is interesting. She remains deeply wedded to Putin's war. This is neocon talking points here, because China has much to gain geopolitically from a Russian victory and potentially even more to lose from a Russian defeat, said Craig Singleton, a senior China fellow at the Nonpartisan Foundations for Defense of Democracy, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. In other words, Putin and Xi's marriage of convenience will endure, not despite Russia's battlefield setbacks, but because of them. So, what is the Foundation for Defense of Democracies? That's an old, I mean, the New York Times is pulling all the stops. That's an old neocon think tank. Let me show you exactly what this neocon think tank is all about. All right. So I'll show you who heads up this neocon think tank first. It is Mr. David Asher. So here's the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Here's its board of advisors, the head board of advisor. And who is this guy? Who is the head of this think tank's board? Well, he was from 2001 to 2005 at the State Department, a senior advisor for East Asian and Pacific affairs during the Bush administration, coordinator, co-chair of the North Korea Activities Group. Then you have, during the Bush administration, he oversaw the global targeting and disruption of Kim Il-sung's regime's financial and WMD networks, i.e., he was in charge of the sanctions against the DPRK at that time. And then you have the strategic architect of the designation of the Banco Delta Asia Macau in the Lebanese Canadian Bank, blah, 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 under Section 311 of the U.S. Patriot Act. So here you have, he's economic terrorism under the Patriot Act, under Obama. And then he advised CENTCOM General John Allen on Iran-Hezbollah economic pressure strategy, as well as on sensitive counter-proliferation, counter-terrorism programs and operations. It goes on and on and on. He is literally a spawn of the deep state, a spawn of the military state. And that's not all, because the connections go deeper. And I'm going to show you just a little bit of an old article from Think Progress. Yes, I know Think Progress is Center for American Progress. Not great, right? We know them to be Neera-Tanden, the old Neera-Tanden neocon liberal source. But nonetheless, here you have in 2011, documents shed light on those underwriting the Foundation for Democracies. And then, okay, it was started during the war on terror, and it was supposed to be nonpartisan, blah, blah, blah. But let's go to what they say they found. They were able to get documents on its funding, and the Abramson Family Foundation, the CEO of the U.S. Healthcare, Leonard Abramson, a healthcare monopoly, offered the largest portion of its startup funding with nearly $250,000 in 2001, and added an additional $600,000 from 2002 to 2004. So there you have a healthcare monopoly. All right. Here's a liquor fortune, the heir to the liquor fortune, Edgar M. and Charles Brofman, adding $1 million over that 3-year period of 2001, 2004. And look at where they served as president of the World Jewish Congress, Mr. Brofman did, from 1979 to 2007. Charles Brofman, along with FDD donor Michael Steinhardt, co-founded Tiglit Birthright, which offers free trips to Israel for young Jewish adults. So Steinhardt is a hedge fund mogul who contributed $850,000 over that 3-year period. And we can go on and on and on. But I think the point here is that the Foundation for Defense of Democracies is a neocon think tank that is led by State Department hawks and spooks and deep state spooks, as well as Israeli agents. I mean, this is really important to note. Is it's not that Israel is like pulling all the strings of U.S. foreign policy. It's that their foreign policies are very much aligned. And so these forces, if you are a mogul or a corporatist and you happen to be Israeli, you are also funding and trying to get in on the lucrative profits from what Israel is doing. to Palestine, and to the broader Middle East, the broader Arab world, the broader region from which it occupies, right? Because it occupies not just Palestine, but also the Syrian Golan Heights, has had a mission for decades to go beyond those lines of demarcation and go further into Egypt, to go further into places like Iran. There is a real lust, right? Lebanon, a real lust to occupy that entire region, right? And to eliminate the people of that region. So therefore, you have a lot of alignment. And that's what the Center for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, that's what it represents. That neocon imperial alliance among the hegemon, the United States, and its deep partnership with Israel. That's what it is. So that's who you have being cited here. All right. So Xi also is emboldened because he has yet to pay a prohibitive cost for his measured support for Russia. Far from being diplomatically isolated, Xi has spent the past 3 months re-engaging with world leaders, many of whom have longed to meet face-to-face with the leader of the world's second largest economy. There you go. China's not isolated. China's doing quite well, and countries seem to like China. That's what they're saying, but it's a bad thing because it emboldens China, right? So the Chinese leader has had productive meetings with European leaders like Olaf Scholz of Germany, Emmanuel Macron of France. He also did very well at the G20, as they cite. And now Qin Gang, China's ambassador to the United States, is going to be the new foreign minister of China. And that a renewed demonstration of Sino-Russian relations solidarity may force Western countries to begrudgingly reassess their willingness to collectively pressure China to rein in its support for Russia. So, what does that tell you? What does that article tell you? That they are triggered. The neocons are triggered by this meeting. They are scared of what they have witnessed. What they witnessed during this video call was not a show of weakness, as they're trying to argue. It's not a show of a decline or division between Russia and China. That unity is happening. The world is changing. And the New York Times desperately wants you to think otherwise. And so that's why they threw all those neocon propagandists. They threw all of those think tanks at your way in order to try to confuse you, to make you think that they are divided. But let me tell you what Russia and China are saying about their partnership really quickly. Here is what Vladimir Putin had to say during that speech, or during that video call. Booming trade with China, says Putin. Moscow and Beijing have achieved unprecedented levels of economic cooperation this year, said the Russian president. Trade turnover between Russia and China has increased to record volumes this year and will reach a target of $200 billion by next year, ahead of expectations. He added that the trade between the two countries continues to grow by the end of the year of upward of 25%, noting that from January to November, the volumes of agricultural turnover surged by 36%. So despite the unfavorable external situation, illegitimate restrictions, and direct blackmail by some Western countries, Russia and China managed to secure record high growth rates of mutual trade. So it's not working. The war is not working. So here we go. More gas exports. The New York Times said this, but he said that Russia has exceeded daily contractual obligations of LNG, liquefied natural gas to China by 18% and boosted oil deliveries to China by 17%, overtaking Saudi Arabia as China's top supplier of oil. So there you have it. Russia and China are strengthening their partnership. And China has some great graphics, but let me pull up the Valde Group's graphic of just how deeply, because this is actually the most recent, I think, graphic I could find of the numbers. All right, this is the scope of it. This is the truth. This is the whole truth, not just the piecemeal analysis you get or the straight up smears you get from the Western media. Here you have the Valde Group, which Vladimir Putin recently spoke at. And here is the numbers of Russia-China cooperation, with trade between the two countries increasing more than 50% since 2014. And China has become Russia's largest export destination. And here you have some numbers. The trade volume is $147.9 billion and they expect that to increase by over 50 billion in the next year. Here you have what China is buying from Russia: oil, gas, coal, timber, agricultural products. Here you have energy as being a big deal. Russia is the second largest supplier of oil to China. That is actually it's the first. It surpassed Saudi Arabia. It's the third largest gas supplier to China, and it's also the second largest coal supplier to China. So other goods, so you have products imported from Russia to China. Here you have all of the various products, and then what you have China selling to Russia. So you have here the commodities are less value added. Of course, you have soy, fish, sunflower oil, poultry going to China. And then you have China selling technologies like smartphones and cars and transport equipment, machinery, mechanical products, all things that you need to develop your economy. So that's why this relationship is so important to Russia, because without it, they're not going to get that from the West. They never were really getting that from the West because the West was always viewing Russia as a vassal. They wanted Russia to be weak. And now the sanctions, it's a whole nother level, right? It's a whole other level of suppression and attempts to sabotage Russia's economy. So in recent years, Western sanctions have pushed Russia to seek investment opportunities in China, including through the Belt and Road Initiative. Here is the growth of Chinese investment in the Russian economy from 2000 to 2017, 107 loans and export credits worth $125 billion, settlements in yuan for Chinese exports, de-dollarization, very much a critical factor in why the United States is so threatened by this partnership. Here you have both countries seeking to reduce their dependence on the dollar. Here are the settlements. That is a turnover of 14 times. You have 14 times the number of settlements in yuan and RMB happening in Russia than you had in 2013 over the past 8 years. Okay, so we can go on and on and on, but that's what the Validate Group had to say about the Russia-China partnership. And now I'm just going to show you what the Global Times has to say about the numbers here of the Russia strategic partnership, the Russia-China strategic partnership. Here are some of the highlights that you need to know. Bilateral trade exceeded 10 billion alone in 2020, and of course, you have more of the Russia. You have the more of the oil trade that's increasing all of the time. You have China and Russia supporting each other in fields such as vaccine development, treatment plans, and epidemic control measures. So public health. You have 30 meetings between Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin since 2013. That's in the last 10 years, 3 meetings per year. That's a really close partnership. Mind you, just being a leader of these countries alone takes a lot of time. We just had a pandemic. I mean, that's a really close partnership when you think about how often those two countries are meeting, and that they're conducting high-level exchanges, military coordination, joint drills, equipment, and tech development based on the principle of non-alignment, non-confrontation, and not targeting any third party. China and Russia have inked a memorandum of understanding to jointly build International Scientific Research Station on the moon. So there you have it. This partnership is expansive. It's not just economic bilateral activities. It's not just they need to come together because they're being targeted by the West. These two countries for decades were separated by ideological difference during the Sino-Soviet split, a huge blunder in the world socialist movement, in global politics generally at that time. Now these two countries are kind of making up for lost time. They're coming together in a moment where the United States' imperial hegemony, its unipolar order, is threatening nuclear annihilation. But really, what it's threatening is the holding back. It is trying to threaten the development of the productive forces, of the development of these two countries, of their capacity to meet not just their needs, but the needs of the planet. That is what Russia and China are seeing, and they are coming together on so many different issues. They're coming together on all aspects of bilateral, multilateral cooperation in order to combat this dangerous trend, this dangerous phenomenon, because this is really existential. The New York Times is right, but they have it flipped. They think it's existential because these two countries are trying to aggressively take over from the West. No, these two countries, Russia and China, see themselves as countries that they want to go their own path, different paths. Russia and China are not the same. China has a socialist market economy. Russia has a kind of resource nationalist capitalist economy. They have two different economic ways of life, but they have converging interests in both defending themselves from US and unipolar hegemony from the United States, EU, the vassal states of the United States, but they also are neighbors. They're also Asian countries, right? Countries that sit in the heart of Eurasia, in the heart of this vastly wealthy continent, one where China is leading in all sorts of important ways in high technology and development of infrastructure, etc. And you have Russia, one of the biggest countries in the world, with all of this potential, all this capacity, all this energy to be able to rebuild what the former Soviet Union had, which was a booming economy at one time, and to even build beyond that, given that the productive forces worldwide are much more advanced than they were in the mid 20th, early 20th century. So you have all this potential, but it's being arrested by the American empire and the US empire. And these two countries are not going to have it. They're going to continue to chart their course of development, and they're going to continue to work together so they can do so both for themselves and for the rest of the world. As someone said in the chat before this stream even started, these two countries care not just about themselves. They do care about the development of all oppressed countries around the world with which they see a common alignment with. They see a common cause with, and that cause is liberating themselves from the yoke of this unipolar order, which has caused so much disaster, this American empire, so much disaster, this hegemony, so much chaos around the world, so much pain, harm, suffering, exploitation, so much war, so much austerity. These two countries are the leading forces in getting out of that. And the United States and its corporate media, the Western corporate media, is absolutely triggered. And they are throwing the entire weight of the neocon propagandist apparatus at all of us. And so we need to see through that. All right, everyone. That's that for the coverage of the Russia-China strategic partnership, the comprehensive strategic partnership. I want to move on now to the segment with the Duran, because we have an update on. So on December 3rd, the same day that all this was happening with Xi and Putin meeting, that video call, you had Turkey and Syria's foreign ministries meeting. Now, in the last several months, especially in the last month, you've had Turkey actually increasing its aggression inside of Syria toward the Kurds, right? Because Turkey has this huge issue with the Kurds. And U.S. forces happen to also occupy northeastern Syria, and Turkey also happens to be there as well. This has been going on for many years, and it really escalated when Russia intervened, and you had the U.S. occupy northern Syria and never left, and Turkey also stayed. Turkey has if you remember, in 2011, 12, 13, 14, those first 3-4 years of this dirty war on Syria led by the U.S. and its Western allies, and of course, all of its allies and semi-allies in the region, you had what was called a rat line. You had a rat line of weapons, of U.S., NATO weaponry, of training facilities, these covert ops. You had CIA, you had the Pentagon, you had a lot of forces on this rat line training jihadists, training terrorists, training armed proxy groups, forces like al-Nusra Front to enter Syria and destabilize it. So that was happening in northern Syria, and that's why Turkey eventually occupied it, because then the United States started to support the Kurds, and Turkey doesn't like the Kurds. There started to be some conflict between the U.S. and Turkey, but where they aligned was the regime change operation that they wanted against Assad and the Syrian Ba'ath government. So that was going on to the tune of just thousands upon thousands of deaths, millions destabilized because of this dirty war, because of the U.S.'s literal use of al-Qaeda forces a la Libya to try to destabilize the country. Now, Syria and Turkey have had very bad relations because of this in recent years. They used to be partners, now they are not. But it is a huge deal that over the course of the last several months to a year, you've had more meetings between Syrian and Turkish officials, whether it's in the intelligence agencies and elsewhere. Now you have a meeting between the foreign ministry of Syria and the foreign ministry of Turkey. And the Duran covered this. And I'm going to play you the first 5 or 6 minutes of this. And then I'm going to show you the update, because now there is an update on this that we should be aware of. And that is an update that I think you will all find interesting, given the analysis that the good folks at the Duran are going to provide here. So let's begin with them and then a commentary. So I'll play you about 5 or 6 minutes of this.
Alexander, let's discuss the defense ministers' meeting and what is now looking like to be something that's inevitable, which is a rapprochement between Erdogan and Assad, Turkey and Syria. So we had the defense ministers of these countries get together and kind of lay down the groundwork for an eventual meeting of both leaders of these countries. Huge news if this does happen. Very, very big news if this happens. It's been a long 12 years now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since Syria.
Exactly.
Yeah, 12 years.
A long, winding, twisted road, but we are almost there. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Erdogan was saying that in order for there to be a summit meeting, there has to be first a meeting of intelligence chiefs. Well, there have been several of those, Turkish and Syrian intelligence chiefs. There have been several of those already. Then he said the defense ministers need to meet. They've just done so. They met in Moscow. Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, was present and he was mediating this meeting. So we had the Syrian and Turkish defense ministers meeting. And then Erdogan said after the defense ministers meet, the foreign ministers need to meet. And Cavusoglu, the Turkish foreign minister, has just said that he anticipates that there will be a meeting of foreign ministers, Syria, Russia, and Turkey, sometime in January. Early in 2023. He said that he's going to be meeting himself one-to-one with Lavrov fairly soon. So there'll be another meeting of the foreign ministers, and that will then clear the way for Assad and Erdogan finally to meet. And they used to be close friends and partners. They then went through this terrible war in which Erdogan attempted to overthrow Assad. That has clearly failed. He's got an election that he's got to win in a short time. He needs to try and get all those Syrian refugees back to Syria. He needs to find some way of ending this crisis in Syria, which has become very unpopular in Turkey. And he also needs Syria's support to deal with the Kurds. So that's the incentive for Erdogan to move. And for Assad, obviously, if Turkey closes the border to insurgencies, to Islamist insurgents, to jihadi groups, well, that is the effective end of the Syrian war.
So, I mean, this is all true. And I just want to add that this would be a huge deal if these two countries can come together and end. And now RT reported around the same time of this video that indeed Turkey has agreed to withdraw its military forces from northeastern Syria. Now, whether that's actually going to be applied or not is a big question, because Syria has been double-crossed many times before. Actually, probably the only country that hasn't double-crossed Syria has been Russia. If you remember, Russia came to help Syria in 2015 and actually helped very much so accelerate the victory that eventually happened in Aleppo and in key areas in Syria to essentially end the jihadist fighting that was going on, to give victory militarily to Syria and the Syrian government. But of course, the economic war kept going. The sanctions on Syria leveled by the United States, the Caesar sanctions, as well as the ongoing military coalition that continues airstrikes and, of course, occupying northeastern Syria, which includes Syria's water resources, oil resources, wheat, very key in resource-rich area, which the United States, along with Turkey, has been stealing Syria's resources, its wheat and its oil, and basically transporting it to Iraq, transporting it then to Turkey, right? There's been open looting going on in coordination with each other. So if Turkey is truly having somewhat of a dispute with the United States at this moment, is having problems internally when it comes to the consequences of what has happened in Syria. If there is going to be a change here, it could spell the end of the war on Syria, and that would be an amazing thing, given that all we've heard, and of course Ukraine is very important, and Ukraine is certainly a flashpoint for the larger situation, the larger relationships that are developing between those forces who are trying to pry their way out of the empire's jaws and the empire itself. But Syria has been all but forgotten, and we can't forget Syria because, well, the war is still raging, and now we have these key developments. So let's finish up what the Duran has to say, and then I'll get to the update because it's very important that we get to that update, which just happened today. Here we go.
That's left then is to tidy up the situation with the Kurds and to get the United States out of Syria, and with Turkey on board with Syria, to be straightforward about it. There's very little prospect of the United States being able to cling on. It would be regionally isolated, and the US troops in eastern Syria would be, frankly, at considerable risk if they stayed there.
A huge diplomatic win for Russia and for Putin. They've shown tremendous patience to try and get this deal worked out, and it looks like it's happening. And a huge loss for, I would say, the Obama administration, who
Yes.
started down this road of
Yes.
trying to overthrow Assad, and a massive loss for the neocons as well. What do you think they're going to try to do to spoil this as we head towards the finish line, the final
They're going to
stretch?
They're going to pull every single pull out every single stop, pull every string to try to get Erdogan defeated in the pending elections. Now, I don't think Erdogan will let that happen. I mean, I don't think that elections in Turkey are, you know, fully free and fair anymore. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what I believe. And I think besides which, Erdogan still has a critical mass of support within Turkey, and I think he'll be able to keep it together. But the way they will do that, the way they will try to undermine Erdogan's position, is by creating more problems in the Turkish economy. And of course, Turkey has high inflation. The lira has been, shall we say, unstable. Erdogan has idiosyncratic views about interest rates, which many people feel stand in the way of an economic stabilization in Turkey. And the United States still has substantial levers to create disruption within the Turkish economy. Now, in the past, whenever it looks like the lira was about to collapse, someone has stepped in to help stabilize it. And, we've never been told exactly who that someone is. It's unlikely to be the Russians, by the way, because I doubt they have the resources to do that. But given that the Russians and the Chinese are working very, very closely together, it might have been the Chinese, for all we know. But anyway, there's going to be a battle over the internal direction of Turkey. I should say that the Turkish opposition parties also support a rapprochement with Syria, but I suspect that nonetheless, the United States would rather see them in power than Erdogan, because Erdogan is such a powerful figure in Turkey. And the Russians, for their part, difficult partner though they find Erdogan to be, would still prefer him in power, because ultimately he's the guarantor that this process will be continued through to its conclusion. So that's going to be the battle. It's going to be over the internal direction of Turkey, and you're going to see major attempts to try and destabilize the situation in Turkey. And indeed, just before we did this program, I saw reports of a major bomb attack in a Turkish city. And of course, remember, there's lots of Islamist groups, extremist jihadi groups operating in Turkey. Who knows? Some of them may have the necessary contacts with our friends in Washington, and they might be activated as well.
So I just wanted to play that because I don't have disagreements with. I do believe that the United States has wanted to control if Erdogan wins, right, or if Erdogan is deposed, because you had a couple of years ago that possible coup attempt. You have forces aligned with the with the more liberal kind of pro-Western forces in Turkey, and you've had you've had attempts to destabilize Erdogan. There's no doubt. I believe that, yes, while Erdogan is not necessarily always an oppositional force to the United States and NATO, it's a NATO member. It does pose some problems, and this peace process is one of those big problems. However, Turkey has its own political agenda. I mean, Erdogan has for years, ever since he rose to power, has an agenda to make Turkey kind of this neo-Ottoman almost empire. It has its own imperial ambitions, which are in competition and ultimately sometimes in direct conflict with the United States' ambitions for the region. And so that's why you do have conflict between the two. And you have sometimes Turkey, right, getting closer to Russia, at times trying to get closer and mend relations with countries that it has conflicts with, Syria, Iran, for example. That's why you have these divisions. However, Turkey's trying to play all sides because Turkey has its own ambitions. And that's why, as you heard Alexander Mercouris say there, Russia, while it hasn't always been a friendship of convenience, it hasn't always been a friendship that's very trustworthy. Nonetheless, Erdogan is the best option out of likely the options like the Gulenists, for example. You have the Gulenists, who you have that horrific basketball player who you have what was his name, Fatullah Gulen, and he's retired. His name is escaping me. I've covered this so much. What's his name? Enes Kanter. You have Enes Kanter, right? These forces that want to depose of Erdogan and want to basically open up Turkey full throttle, right? Not just be a part of NATO, not just work with international financial institutions, but make Turkey into essentially a Western protectorate. And Erdogan has neo-Ottoman ambitions, which means some semblance of sovereignty is necessary to get that done. But Turkey is still not always trustworthy. And so after the Duran reported this, right, today we had the Cradle, another really great resource to follow. You have to understand that Turkey is not necessarily the most trustworthy of partners in this multipolar moment, in this multipolar world that's emerging. Indeed, Turkey has its own ambitions, and that essentially the hope that Assad and Erdogan will meet is probably muted at this point. While it's a lot of progress has been made in potentially ejecting Turkey as an occupying force in Syria and maybe ending that war, that is moving in a positive direction. So there with the Duran guys, I have no disagreement. But now we have developments that show that things are a little more complicated, unfortunately, I think. You have the Turkish foreign minister right after his meeting with Syria's foreign minister meeting with the Syrian opposition. All right. And so on January 3rd, you had Turkish foreign minister Mevlut Cavusoglu held a meeting with the chairman of the National Coalition of Syrian Opposition and Revolutionary Forces, Salam El-Masset, and the president of Syrian Turkmen Assembly. Abdul Rahman Mustafa, according to the Anadolu news agency. We reiterate our support for the opposition and the Syrian people in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 2254, Cavusoglu said in a post on his Twitter profile, referring to a 2015 UN request for a political solution and ceasefire in Syria. The Turkish foreign minister's meeting with the Syrian opposition comes a week after Defense Minister Hulusi Akar met with his Syrian and Russian counterparts in Moscow, signaling a rapprochement between Ankara and Damascus. According to reports, the leaders and sympathizers of the Syrian opposition, who primarily live in the war-torn nation that Ankara indirectly control, the areas, the northeastern areas, are terrified of the rapprochement. So meanwhile, Cavusoglu stated that he anticipates meeting with Faisal Mekdad, his Syrian counterpart, in Moscow in the second half of January. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has proposed a meeting of foreign ministries after the defense discussions to perhaps set up a presidential summit. According to reports, however, President Bashar al-Assad will not agree to see Erdogan before Turkey's general election, which is slated for June. On the other hand, on the 5th of December, the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces announced the resumption of joint operations with U.S. forces in northern Syria following the tensions between the militia and Turkey. The spokesperson for the SDF refrained from commenting on this subject for the time being. So you have basically Turkey meeting with the Syrian opposition. Now, the Syrian opposition, unfortunately, is going to be a player in this. And so it's unclear how significant this is, whether this is kind of a breaking point. There's not going to be what the Duran was saying, what Makuris was saying. There's not going to be a meeting between Assad and Erdogan before June. It's clear that Syria doesn't want to be part of Turkey's election ambitions. It doesn't want to be a part of that process. But also, right, Syria doesn't have plans on conceding to the Syrian opposition. It never did. It already did do that in 2012 with the parliamentary reforms. I don't know if you remember, but immediately after the so-called protests and then the violence broke out, Syria instituted immediate political reforms, included opposition parties into the parliament, many of whom had not been able to participate before, including opposition parties. And so no more concessions are going to be granted. So the fact that Turkey is still recognizing these forces as potential political players in some kind of solution does hint that Turkey doesn't have a 100% clear vision for peace with Syria's existing government, but in shaping some kind of political resolution that benefits itself as well as the larger situation, because Turkey does have an interest politically for peace, because this war has been costly. It has cost a lot of people. Terrorist attacks have happened inside of Turkey. There's a lot of political problems that have occurred because of Turkey's unrepentant support for regime change against Syria. But now it's seeing that it is coming up in direct conflict with U.S. forces, the Kurdish forces that the U.S. is supporting in Syria to try to hold together its own armed insurgency. So that's a big conflict for Turkey, the U.S. supporting Kurdish groups to try to overthrow Assad. Turkey sees that as directly in conflict with its own interests, because Turkey has basically a program for waging counter-terror operations and war on the Kurds. And this is a big conflict. This is one of the reasons why Sweden and Finland can't find their way into NATO, is because Turkey has said many times over that Sweden and Finland has condemned Turkey for its practices, its targeting of the Kurds, and that is in direct violation of its own sovereign interests. So it's not going to unanimously agree to allow Finland and Sweden to NATO. Now, I also think that Turkey doesn't want to backstab Russia. It has done so before. If you remember the downing of the Russian plane over this conflict during that war. So it's not like Putin and Erdogan, Russia and Turkey have the warmest of relations, but their partnership has grown pretty immensely in these last several years, in the last decade or so. And these two countries see it as within their interest to broker some kind of peace, but it will be a peace that Turkey wants to see benefit itself as well, despite the fact that it is an occupying force in Syria. We have to be clear about that. And so while you have the U.S. hoping to destabilize Turkey's political situation for its own ends. It wants to end any kind of opposition to its larger Cold War against Russia, against China. So it definitely does not want to see Erdogan pursue any kind of path that would undermine this. You also have Turkey and the United States cooperating in many ways while also being in conflict. So you have a lot of contradictions here that are going to play out. It's unclear where this exactly will go, but it's very important to understand that peace is actually moving forward, that there are really big steps, really huge steps, really important steps in this direction. And we have to understand that, we have to know this, and we have to continue to call for the end of the dirty war on Syria. This is something I've been covering since 2011. I've written dozens of articles about it. I've also covered it here on this channel. This is a dirty war. This is a proxy war. This is a war that's just as important as Ukraine. Why? Because you already have the same kind of great power conflict emerging in this country. You had Russian forces and U.S. forces coming into conflict with each other, coming into potential contact. I remember before my father died, he called me in 2000, I think it was 2017, early that year, when there was regular possible confrontation and escalation between Russian and U.S. forces inside of Syria because of the U.S.'s insistence of trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad and Russia's insistence that it wasn't going to let that happen. So I remember that very vividly, and I've covered this many times over. You had the missiles, right? The missiles in 2017 and 18 that the U.S. launched based on chemical weapons accusations, which people like Aramate have debunked. This atrocity propaganda against Syria. You have to learn from history. And history shows that whether it's Libya, whether it's Syria, or whether it's Ukraine, you have the same playbook, atrocity propaganda. Look at the Bucha massacre, right? Mariupol. They try to tell you that Russia's massacring people in order for you to support U.S. war efforts against Russia. Libya, Syria, these countries have all faced the same kind of propaganda war campaigns. China has faced it with Xinjiang, with Hong Kong. You see it over and over again. The playbook is the same. So we have to understand that the situation in Syria is reflective of this larger imperial agenda, this larger unipolar hegemon, this hegemonic system of empire that the United States is leading and is attempting to destabilize Syria so it can destabilize the region, so it can get to Russia and China. The road to Russia, to Moscow, to Beijing, according to U.S. warmongers, Western warmongers, neocons, is to pave the path in all regions of the world toward that end. And one of the biggest is the Arab world, is the Middle East, is the cradle of civilization. This entire region, the United States has spent destabilizing for many decades in order to get to this moment where it can feel like it's prepared to take on countries that are surpassing it, that are growing, that are becoming real challenges to the U.S.'s dominance economically, politically, and militarily in the world. That is the stakes here. That is the stakes in Syria. And it is good news that peace is making its way forward, that there's progress, but we have to watch and see what happens with how Turkey continues to maneuver this process, because Turkey has not necessarily been a player that is willing to settle without its own imperial interests being met. And it has been met with much resistance from the West in this regard, as well as a resistance at times from Russia and from Syria and from other countries that have seen Turkey's nefarious dealings as big problems. So Turkey finds itself in the middle here, and we will see where that struggle ends up taking the world. But you heard it here first, that there is progress being made, and that is very good news. So that's the end of that story. Let's get to the last one quickly to close out. All right. So I've been saying this for a long time, guys. Ukraine is not just a war between Russia and NATO. Now, Russia has been saying for now weeks upon weeks that it is fighting NATO. It's fighting the West in Ukraine. It's not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between Russia and the West. Sergei Shoigu, right, the defense minister, he's been saying it, right? That's true. But Ukraine is not just a war between Russia and the West. It is the United States' war on the world. And in particular, it is all about, right, Russia, right, Moscow, the road to Moscow through Ukraine is also the pathway to Beijing, to China. The United States sees Ukraine as a really good opportunity to test out the final confrontation. It sees the end game, so to speak. It sees Taiwan as a potential flashpoint for a confrontation between the two countries, but it sees the whole Asia Pacific as that potential flashpoint as well. It just so happens that Taiwan is geographically a very convenient to wage some kind of military operation. Now, of course, there are many problems with this that we could probably spend a lot of time talking about. But I think what's important to note is that the overall agenda here, and the overall agenda is that the United States sees Ukraine as a testing ground for a future conflict with China because Russia holds similar geopolitical implications for the United States, but China is the big prize. The Chinese market, the destabilization of China's economic influence, the ability to control the Asia Pacific, and in turn also the African continent, possibly even Latin America. A lot of that goes through China now because China is all of these countries' biggest trading partner. It actually is providing a counterweight and alternative to U.S. dominated international financial institutions through its lending practices. It's building infrastructure in the African continent in ways that the U.S. and the West never have, never will. So in all of these ways, China represents this real threat, not just the China threat, which is all about Cold War propaganda and jingoism and racism, but the real threat is actually that the United States' empire is in decline and China will be stepping in not as a replacement, but as an alternative. That's really what is at heart here with the US's obsession with trying to build up a conflict toward China. So Ukraine is all about building up to China, building up to a larger war with China. And guess what? Former US officials have been saying as much. You've heard over and over and over again, all the same Beltway think tanks that I've cited here, all those neocon propagandists, both political parties have been saying, well, Ukraine is like Taiwan, and eventually we're going to be dealing with the same situation in Taiwan. They've been saying it out of the side of their mouth without really attaching the significance, without really saying, well, this is a proxy war. This is about regime change against Russia and regime change against China. They haven't said that outright, but now U.S. officials or former U.S. officials are saying this. So here you have Oliver North, Mr. Iran-Contra. So, just a quick rundown of Iran-Contra. So that scandal, which occurred during the Reagan administration, what was going on is that the CIA and the United States' political apparatus, they were facilitating dirty wars, like Max Blumenthal is saying here. This is Max Blumenthal's tweet. He's saying that Reagan's dirty wars in Central America, Africa, and Afghanistan are akin to Ukraine. And that, I believe, is true. But Iran-Contra was all about, you had sanctions on Iran after the Iranian Revolution 79. But you also had the Iran-Iraq war happening. You had also these dirty wars in Central America, the Contras fighting in places like Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala. You had Central America on fire, right, with the Contras. And the United States needed to find a way to arm Iran and supply the Contras. And what they decided to do was to secretly funnel arms to Iran and then get those weapons to the Contras in exchange. Some people say for cocaine, some people say for drugs. But nonetheless, this was all about trying to create new modes of arms transfers to the Contras to ensure that these wars continue, because there was a lot of opposition to this, right? There was domestic opposition in the US. There was also some unfortunate diplomatic losses that the United States was taking on the open front. So covertly, the United States committed just outright corruption and ended up with this scandal. So Oliver North was the fall guy. He was definitely one of the I wouldn't call him an architect, but he was certainly moving through this process. And he was in the American administration. He was in the national security staff. He was an advisor. And so he was tasked with facilitating this process. But here you have Oliver North basically going on Fox News and he admits what I've been saying here, that this is all, Ukraine is all about paving the way to a war with China. Here's what he had to say.
Is that money well spent? The president's assuring us that he's going to deal with it responsibly, but $110 billion, American people aren't seeing that kind of money. It's coming out of their pockets.
Well, it's coming out of all of our pockets, but it's money well spent. In my humble opinion, this is very much like what Ronald Reagan did back in the 80s. And I do have some experience with that. I know that makes me a lot older than most of our viewers, but in fact, he believed in supporting freedom fighters. He did it in Latin America. He did it in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique. He did it in Afghanistan. Those people were willing, as the Ukrainian people are, to use their blood and our bullets. And by the way, most of that 110 billion total.
They are willing, the Ukrainian people, just like the African insurgencies that they funded, that the CIA funded, just like the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that the CIA funded, just like the Contras, which the CIA funded. Ukrainians are willing to spill their blood with our bullets. He's literally saying this. This just goes to show how the foreign policy establishment actually thinks about Ukraine. Not some kind of democracy. It's some kind of heroic effort to undermine Russia, to defeat Russia. It is actually all about weapons. It's all about fueling dirty wars. But let's continue.
Between the 45, the 1.7, and the previous 65, over 110 billion, is spent here in the United States. It's provided to contractors and defense logisticians and the kinds of people who build the kinds of systems that we're getting. So most of that money is spent here in America. Good, hardworking Americans have the jobs. And when you look at that kind of an investment, what would be the difference if, when the giant does awake, and that's all about communist China. It's just not a plug for this book. The idea of it is to make sure that they get the right message and to make sure that Putin gets the right message. No more invasions. And that means the people in Taiwan are going to need the same kinds of weapon systems that we're now providing to the Ukrainians.
So there you have it. They need the same kind of weapons. Okay. That's what they're saying here. That's what Oliver North is saying here, is that everything that's happening in Ukraine is justified. All these weapons transfers, it's not only good for jobs in America, but it's great for the world because Ukraine needs all of these weapons to defeat Russia. So a message is sent to China. The sleeping giant of communist China needs to understand that what's happening to Ukraine could happen to China. That is the out-and-out message of Oliver North, Iran-Contra scandal extraordinaire, this outright neocon criminal who nearly brought the world to the brink as a cold warrior, trying to threaten and encircle and basically kill whoever and whatever movements arose against U.S. empire at the time of the Cold War. Now he's saying in this new Cold War moment that it is time to show China that Ukraine is actually all about leading up to a war with China, with the CPC, with the Chinese government. So they're just telling us right to our faces what the reality is, essentially. Oliver North, right? That you can trust him on these issues, on this question, because he is simply a mouthpiece. He is someone who has a lot of experience in this regard, in proxy wars. This is what he spent much of his political career helping to facilitate. And so there you have it. China is next. This is something that has been in the making for many years. When Russia and China were being encircled at the same time in a very similar way, just different institutions, different countries, different parts of the world. Nonetheless, when you had NATO's buildup along Russia's border happening at the same time that the United States was basically shifting nearly everything it had to the Asia Pacific, a lot of people didn't get it. A lot of people didn't understand that there was a purpose to this, that it wasn't just what the neocons and what the war propagandists and what the corporate media was telling us, that there was a real purpose behind it, that the purpose was that these two countries were next, and that it didn't really matter which order it went, but that many strategists, many of these imperial think tankers, what they understood was, and you heard it from John Mearsheimer here on this channel when I covered his thoughts about Taiwan and China, a lot of them understand that China is strong, economically especially, and that it is very difficult to undermine China in the same way that it thought it could Russia. Now, it underestimated Russia, I believe. I believe that the U.S. imperial deep state, its apparatus, it underestimated Russia. It thought, well, Russia's weaker. Russia's still coming out of the Soviet Union's collapse. It still has a lot of contradictions. It has a lot of internal issues. It has a lot of things we can exploit. It's not as big economically, right? It's still really kind of a neo-colony in a lot of ways, economically, not necessarily politically. But in terms of its economic size, there is a lot of ways. If sanctions like what was put onto Russia during this Ukraine crisis, during this proxy war led by the NATO, if those sanctions were slapped onto Russia, Russia would collapse, and then we can get to China. I mean, NATO literally said as much during its summit in June of 2022. It said, hey, China's a malicious actor, and we need to get more involved there as well in that region to stop China. And that was NATO vocalizing and voicing the agenda. And the agenda is, yes, Russia needs to be overthrown, needs to be regime changed, and so does China. And it's just a matter of how. And so Oliver North says, well, right on Sean Hannity's program, right on Fox News says, well, here's how. You keep pumping weapons into Ukraine. You defeat Russia, which is a pipe dream, by the way. Defeat Russia and then show China, the sleeping giant, communist China, show China that it's next, that Taiwan now needs to receive the same amount of money for arms. The New York Times argued this. It's not just Oliver North. It's not just Fox News. The New York Times I showed on this channel was arguing the same thing. Turn Taiwan into a porcupine against China. Start to funnel the same kind of weapons. In the new National Defense Authorization Act, there's lots of money earmarked for more weapons transfers to Taiwan, including backlogs of somewhere a little under $20 billion. But they said, again in the New York Times, this is multiple times the New York Times saying, well, it's hard to arm Taiwan. It doesn't have the same capabilities as Ukraine does. It doesn't have NATO countries surrounding it. It doesn't have the same kind of advantages. But we need to step it up. We need to prepare Taiwan. Again, another pipe dream. Taiwan never will militarily be able to confront the mainland. And honestly, the people who live in Taiwan, which is Chinese territory under international law, under 3 joint communiques between the U.S. and China, as well as many agreements with most countries in the world, 90+% of them. It's just a different situation. But nonetheless, the U.S. continues to pump weapons into forces in Taiwan that are friendly towards separatism and independence and have bought into the China scaremongering, have been bribed into it, have been benefiting from it. And that's the strategy. The strategy is to try to fortify Taiwan so it can be a launching pad for a war with China. And Ukraine is a testing ground for that as well. The imperialists, the hegemonists, the Western empire does not think in terms of one country or another country. It thinks about the world. It thinks about domination in domination terms. It thinks about how it can control not just Ukraine, not just Russia, not just China, but everywhere. It wants to be the sole superpower so that it can have all of the advantages that come with that, including being able to park its flailing monopoly corporate capitalist economy onto the throats to plunder the people, to sit on their throats, to rob them of everything they have, and to have the political control to be able to do that. That's really what is at stake here. And China and Russia present the two biggest impediments to that. And it's not just because China and Russia stand alone in this. It's because China and Russia diplomatically, politically, economically, militarily have very strong relations with most of the world, especially the global south, and that relationship is going to only strengthen. You saw African countries reject sanctions on Russia. You've seen African countries reject decoupling from China, maximizing and increasing its trade partnerships, its economic partnerships with China. You see the same in Latin America, in the Caribbean. You see Cuba, you see Syria, you see all these countries, 140 plus, join the Belt and Road Initiative. You see the strengthening of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of the BRICS Plus mechanism. You just see over and over again, even countries like Saudi Arabia, like Bahrain, like the Gulf Cooperation Council. You see all of these countries in what used to be hostile, basically pro-U.S. imperial territory, suddenly come to their senses and say, it's time to balance out our political and economic relationships. And that means getting closer with Russia and China. And the U.S. is actually the one becoming more and more isolated. So in order to stop that isolation, the United States, through mouthpieces like Oliver North going on Fox News, this is the line. And the line is that, and this is the line among the neocons, that Ukraine is not just a war between NATO and Russia. It is a war that is meant to lead into a broader conflict with China. We have to understand that, and we have to thus understand both, because this is a big blind spot for many. Big blind spot. There's a lot of people who believe that the U.S. media, the Western media, is lying about Russia, and understand that there is an operation going on against Russia when it comes to Ukraine, that there's a broader imperial agenda. But with China, it's a lot harder, because the Cold War propaganda has arguably been even stronger, in that China, being a socialist identifying country, a country that's led by a communist party, has a lot more baggage for people in the West to overcome. There's a lot more baggage to overcome than with Russia, which, unfortunately, the Western mentality often is, the weaker the country is, the better it is for people to support. That's why you have people who support Palestine, for example, but who won't speak out for Syria, because Syria pushed back the empire, and Palestine has yet to be able to do so successfully in a while, right? Palestinians find themselves in a much more marginal position than, let's say, the Syrian government, right? Palestinian people are still fighting for a state itself, to be able to have that kind of self-determination and sovereignty, which Syria supports, by the way. But what I'm saying here is that people in the West, even those who are well-meaning, who even oppose the U.S.'s proxy war on Russia through Ukraine, often don't get the China connection, and often don't understand that these two countries are aligned, Russia and China, in many ways, and they are being provoked and attacked by the same empire, and that it's happening simultaneously. and that we can't choose one over the other. That is a fool's game, and that is one that will do nothing for the cause of peace. So listen to Oliver North. Listen to what he has to say, because that is a true education in the empire. That is a true that is what it means for the establishment, for the blob, as Mark Sloboda has called it, with the foreign policy blob basically saying out loud what it's always thinking, which is, how do we undermine China? How can Ukraine, this proxy war in Ukraine, undermine China? And the way that they see it is that if they can get victories in Ukraine against Russia, if they can bring Russia down, again, a fantasy, but if they can do it, then they can do it against China. So everyone, it is 10:45 p.m. That is it for the content portion. We have 770 viewers on here and about 739 likes. So that's a great ratio. Thanks so much. Stick around, though. I'm going to go into shout outs and announcements. The first announcements, let me just get my computer charger. The first announcement, guys, is that Thursday I am bringing on Brian Berletic. It's going to be an early stream. We do a monthly stream right here on this channel. So Brian Berletic, that will be about 11:30 Eastern time. I am going to make sure that you all are notified about that. All right. So Brian Berletic and I will talk. Okay. So that will be a great conversation. We're going to do predictions in 2023 and beyond about what's going on in Ukraine, Asia, and globally when it comes to the empire. What's going to happen, right? Because I haven't done that here. I want to do that with him. I'm not doing predictions or reflections or any of that, but I'll do that with him because that will be very fun. All right. So we're going to have Brian Berletic on Thursday, mid-morning, my time, Eastern time. So please do save the date and come through for the next stream. And then I'll probably stream solo again on Saturday night, I believe. All right. And working on some collabs. Definitely we'll have a guest on the following week. So from No Dull, the Korean organization that I've spoken to. So this January is going to be a very busy one. All right. It's going to be a great one, though. All right. So let's get into some shout outs. Okay. I'm going to go backwards. It's a little easier for me. Thank you so much, Jeff Sirloin, okay, for becoming a member. All right. I see you chatting here. I'm just going to give you a shout out. I know you're having a conversation there, but Jeff, thanks so much for becoming a member to this channel. And then you have Denarel. Thanks so much for being a member of this channel as well. Thanks to all the YouTube members. That's a great way to support this channel. Just hit that button, that join button, and it's $5 per month. All right. So let me see if I can find more super chats here. Okay. And while you're waiting for the super chats, everyone, make sure that you're subscribing on Patreon. That's the best way to support this work. At Patreon, I give early announcements. I also allow people to suggest content. So please do support me on Patreon. You can do annual memberships there. So if you don't like the YouTube monthly format, there are annual memberships with the tiers of $5, $10, or $20 a month. So please do, yearly, that will come out to something a little less because there's a little discount. So patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong is the best way to support. This is completely independent work. We're still building. We're still moving up. And I do plan in 2023 to upgrade some technology. I need to get a new computer for this kind of work because I am burning through the technology that I have because I didn't expect to be this active. But now that I am, I need equipment that will serve this purpose a lot better than what I have. So that's the goal for 2023. So please do support the work and help me keep giving quality content here. We have a new member, Cheryl. Thanks so much, Cheryl, for becoming a member of this channel. I'll pull that up when I come back down. But thank you so much, Cheryl. Just wanted to announce that. Thanks so much for joining. So 2023, everyone. It's going to be a year. All right. Happy New Year to everyone, says None of Your Business, None OYB. Thanks for all I do. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate that super chat. Thank you so much, David, for your super sticker. Really appreciate your support. You coming through. I know you come through here quite often. Let's see what else we got here. All right. I know there was maybe a few more. I'm excited for this year. I don't know about you, Will. I'm excited. This channel is growing. I definitely have some goals to make sure this channel gets over the 50,000 subscriber mark. I didn't want to say while I'm waiting for a super chat, while I'm looking for it, Twitter. I do not find Elon Musk's Twitter to be more liberating. I find that my Twitter is basically, it feels shadow banned. Of course, I haven't been able to prove that, but it feels very shadow banned at the moment. So if you can follow me on Twitter, make sure you do. It's at Spirit of HO. That's the word spirit, the word of, and the word HO. All right. So you can follow me there on Twitter. I've just been throttled. It's just ridiculous. The censorship on these platforms is outrageous. So Megan, thanks so much for that contribution. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you so much, JM. Shout out to you for your regular attendance here. I really appreciate all your support and your membership. Let's see what else we got here. We're headed toward the beginning half here. So yeah, Twitter at Spirit of Hope, but also follow me on Telegram. I don't do much when I am canceled from Twitter. I'll definitely do more original posts on Telegram. Right now, it's mostly relegated to reminders about what I'm doing. But Telegram at Danny Dhaiphong. Just type my name in at Danny Dhaiphong, one word. I am the Dhaiphong Press on Telegram. Do follow me there, t.me/Danny Dhaiphong with no spaces, no capitals, just my name. Follow me there. Actually, that's better even than Twitter because I'm quick. I can't, I do like one tweet maybe here a day and I keep it at that and then just keep it moving because it's just not really worth it. It's not, I'm not growing an audience there. My tweets are getting shadow banned. The view mechanism that Musk's Twitter regime has instituted has only made it more apparent that there's something going on. You get thousands of views and then like a couple of likes, and it's not a ratio thing because, I'm not getting ratioed in these posts, but nonetheless, this is the life of social media. This is what it means to do independent journalism on these platforms. They really do have a lot. These corporations have a lot of control. Thank you so much, John T, for your super sticker. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mahmoud Marandi. Thank you so much. Well, when it comes to Jimmy Carter, he left in 79. All right. And you have to understand that Jimmy Carter, thank you so much again for that super chat. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I will just say that Jimmy Carter is huge in terms of the Iran-Contra because of what Jimmy Carter did to Iran, the hostage crisis. But Jimmy Carter opposed the Iranian Revolution, began the sanctions regime, began the proxy wars there. And then with Afghanistan, funneling through Operation, what was it, Mongoose? Arms to the Mujahideen, training them through the CIA. And that really opened the floodgates for this style, this operation, this use of proxies. And so the Iran-Contra scandal is all about that. It's all about fueling dirty wars. And so Jimmy Carter is the natural extension. He really was. Him and Reagan are not that different foreign policy-wise. Not really. Not really. So, Rich Floor, thank you so much for the super sticker. Appreciate that. Thanks so much, Kevin, for the super sticker. Appreciate you. Really appreciate the generosity, everyone. Thank you so much again, JM, for being here as a member. And that's it. That's all for the super chats. And we have, let's see what else. We had another member, right? Yes, we had Cheryl. Big Teal says, thank you for being a moderator. Big Teal, thank you so much for shouting Cheryl out. And thank you, Cheryl, for becoming a member here. Anything on Rockfin? No tips on Rockfin. All right, none there. But thank you so much for everyone watching on Rockfin. We got 10 people on Rockfin, adding to our 656 still here with me. Thanks so much. Yeah, this was a good stream. Good stream to come back to. We'll be back on Thursday too, so not too long from now. I have Brian Berletic. I'm going to set that up tomorrow, send him all the information. So you are ready for what will be a fun conversation. Somebody, moderator said I got 5 gifted memberships. I'm not paying attention anymore. Wow. So thank you, Charlotte. I see a lot of new members. Wow. Thank you. You can gift. Yes, you can still gift. Thank you to all those who have been gifted. Thank you to Charlotte who have gifted memberships to me. Thanks so much to the moderator, Liz, who pointed that out to me. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. That's amazing. Amazing. All that support, it's really humbling, everyone. It's really humbling. So Brian Berletic is coming on, guys. Brian Berletic. It's going to be fun. So I'll tell you a little bit about the agenda for the month. So I have Brian Berletic on Thursday. The next week, the next following Thursday, I'll have No Dut Dull on, a representative there to talk about Korea and geopolitics. And then the other guest I have planned, I definitely want to get Margaret on here this month, and maybe someone else with her. We're going to work on that. And then Chris Hedges at the end of the month. All right. Chris Hedges at the end of the month. Thank you so much. Everyone is being so incredibly kind. This channel is growing. Unlike the New York Times says about Russia and China, what Russia says about China, this channel is growing beyond beyond even what I had expected. I believed that this would grow the more that I put into it. I did believe the hard work would pay off, but I think all of you have really just embraced the direction here and the shift. And the more that you do, the more that other people begin to come through. And and so that's great. That's humbling. It's amazing. And I look forward to to continuing on this year and making things happen on this channel, as well as my writing. I did write an article. I didn't even share it. I talked about it's on topic for the stream. I wrote an article in CGTN about how in 2022 the U.S. unipolar order was more unstable than ever. So while I talked a lot about how Russia and China multipolarity is stabilizing and growing, the counter is also true, that the U.S.'s unipolar imperial order is becoming more and more unstable. So I talked about that. So I'm still writing, so the media work is still continuing in all of its diversity, but I am primarily on this channel, and you all make it possible. And Loa Socialisti, yes, 14,000 subscribers in the last, that was 4 months. That was 4 months ago that I was about at 4, in the last 4 or 5 months, I've experienced, maybe 20,000 plus subscribers on here. And that's been incredible amount of growth. More than 20,000 subscribers in that period of time. So I'm hoping to continue on a steady course. It's not always going to be so big, but I'm hoping it'll be so steady so that this channel, is seen by more people. That's really the point here. Seen by more people. I can do the work more. I do have travel plans this coming year. I'm going to go to Europe for more of a vacation. But I'm hoping Vietnam is a destination, and I'm hoping China, now that there's reopening, and I will be trying to. Now, streaming from there might be difficult unless I connect with someone, but I do want to head out there. I'm hoping that I will get some kind of invitation. That's been something swirling around from a few people I know. But nonetheless, I'm hoping to, at the very least, right, bring you the coverage of what I experience in these places, except Europe, more so a vacation. But no, you can't depoliticize anything. So I'm sure I'll be noticing things and reporting on them. But with China and Vietnam, I definitely want to do some real study and reporting, and it would be great to do a live there. I just don't know how to use equipment like that. So that will be a learning curve if I try. That's why I want to upgrade technology, which is why if I can get that technology upgraded in the next, I'm hoping to be able to save up by the summer of this year. If I can do that, actually hoping by the spring of this year, I'll have enough saved up to do it so that I can plan for these trips. That will probably happen at the tail end of the year, the second half. That'd be great. That'd be incredible. So nonetheless, this growth only helps, matters. So really appreciate all of you. I see members here. Jeff saying he wants to go to China so badly. Goal to move there permanently. Big Teal says go to an African country. Oh my gosh, I have so many hopes to go. Like my two big destinations in Africa would be Zimbabwe and Eritrea, just because I've always been so inspired by those two countries' development models, like what they've been able to do. Zimbabwe with land reform. Of course, Zimbabwe is crippled with sanctions, unfortunately. But Zimbabwe with land reform and nationalization, and Eritrea with its own sovereign development, really close relations with the multipolar world. It's a part of the UN, the Friends in Defense of the UN Charter, group of friends in defense of the UN Charter. I want to go to those two countries. Man, I had a falling out with a contact that I was hoping could make that happen for me with Eritrea in particular, but there's always opportunities elsewhere, I'm sure. But Big Teal, thanks for the suggestion. Definitely need to head to the African continent. I want to go everywhere. I mean, after I went to China, I got the travel bug, and COVID happened, and that bug was contained at least. But I definitely want to go. And so, yeah, Cheryl says waiting 3 long years to go to China. Yeah. I went right before COVID. I was so lucky. And then I wanted to go back, and then boom, COVID, everything shut down. And now we're just getting to the point where it might be possible. And so I'm itching. I really am to get back there because there's a lot to cover. China's developed so fast, even during COVID. I want to see some of these projects. I want to take the Lao Railway. I want to do stuff like that. Meet up with some folks out there. But we'll see. More to come. Definitely. All right, everyone. All right. Everyone's saying China's too big. I mean, look, it's great. So big. I got such a little taste. It was so annoying. Like I got to see the northeast, all the way to the northwest. I got to go to Xinjiang. That was incredible. But all of the destinations felt way too short. And I'll never forget walking like 3 hours in Beijing and feeling like I got nowhere. Never forget that experience. In Jingjing Li over at Talk It Out in CGTN, and made the joke to me saying that there's a joke in Beijing that if you date someone who lives in one side of Beijing and the other, that's a long distance relationship. Of course, the transportation is really good in Beijing now, like incredibly good. So you can take a train across the city and it takes 15 minutes. It's ridiculous. But it's still huge. Try to walk it and you're making a big mistake. I tried. I had a map app. I'll never, it's just like one of these experiences you get as a bumbling tourist. My wife and I were walking. We are like, oh, we'll meet you we were going to visit a hospital. We'll meet you at the hospital and we'll walk there from the hotel. We'll like eat breakfast kind of slow and we'll walk like we're in the US or something, like we're in Boston or New York or something. Oh, we'll meet you. Oh, it's only that far in the map. It's like a straight shot. My phone ended up dying because the map sucked up so much battery, and we were walking for like 2 hours plus before we even got anywhere close. It was funny. All right. A lot of funny conversations happening in the chat right now. All right, everyone. It is getting late. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you to all the moderators. Thank you to all the new members from the gift subscriptions and elsewhere. Thank you so much to all those who have subscribed on Patreon. Thanks to all my Patreon members. Thanks to Substack, everywhere. Thanks to everyone who pays on PayPal. I see you guys. I see all of you who really do contribute to this. And thanks to anyone who, even if you can't, I get it. Thanks to all of you to come who view these streams, who have helped to make this channel grow. So I'm going to depart. All right. So before you leave, of course, if you haven't dropped a like, do so. Drop that like, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell, and do consider if you can. All right. Subscribing on Patreon, the best way. You can do so here on YouTube as well. But patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Thank you so much. Take care. And I will see you on Thursday with Brian Berletic, the new Atlas. Should be fun. Take good care. Bye-bye.